At 8:30 in the morning, you wake up. You check your phone. Messages, notifications, work, school, bills, appointments. There is always something waiting for you. Now remove all of it. No alarm clock. No office. No boss. No emails. No Monday morning. No weekend. No concept of a 9-to-5 job. Imagine waking up 20,000 years ago. You open your eyes inside a shelter made from wood, hide, bone, and whatever your group could find. The fire is almost dead. Someone is already awake. Someone is preparing food. Someone is repairing a tool. Outside, the temperature is below freezing. And you have a question modern humans almost never ask. What are you supposed to do all day? Because your ancestors had no jobs, no career, no paycheck, no retirement, and yet they could not simply spend the entire day doing nothing. Your survival depended on what happened between sunrise and sunset. The strange part is that it probably looked nothing like the schedule you know today. You didn't wake up and work for 8 hours. You didn't commute. You didn't sit in meetings. You didn't spend 40 hours a week producing one specialized thing. Instead, your day was broken into hundreds of small tasks. Find food. Find water. Maintain fire. Repair clothing. Make tools. Watch children. Process plants. Track animals. Move camp. Rest. Talk. Wait. And sometimes, do absolutely nothing useful. That last part is where the story gets strange. Because for most of human history, people had something modern workers rarely have. Unscheduled time. But that does not mean prehistoric humans were lazy. It means your definition of work is probably too narrow. In a hunter-gatherer society, the same person could be a hunter in the morning, a toolmaker in the afternoon, a caregiver later, and a storyteller at night. There was no job title. There was only whatever needed to happen next. And archaeology gives you a way to see fragments of that day. At Ohalo 2 in Israel, people lived around 23,000 years ago. The site was preserved under layers of sediment near the Sea of Galilee. What survived is extraordinary. There were huts, fireplaces, stone tools, animal remains, thousands of charred seeds, and evidence of plant processing. This wasn't a single activity. It was an entire daily system. Someone had to collect the plants. Someone had to bring them back. Someone had to process them. Someone had to control the fire. Someone had to prepare the food. And someone had to eat it. The important detail is that these activities did not necessarily happen one after another. They overlapped. You could be sitting near a fire repairing a tool, while another person processed seeds nearby. A child could be watching. An older person could be doing something else. Knowledge moved through the group while ordinary tasks were happening. There was no classroom. There was no training seminar. A child learned by watching someone who already knew what to do. That matters because prehistoric life required an enormous amount of knowledge. You had to know which plants were edible, which ones were poisonous, where water appeared during dry seasons, where animals migrated, which stone produced a sharp edge, how to maintain fire, how to build shelter, how to recognize dangerous weather, and how to remember all of it. Your ancestors were constantly working with information, but much of that work left no obvious archaeological trace. A stone tool survives. The conversation that happened while making it does not. A fire survives as ash. The stories told around it disappear. A shelter may leave post holes. The people laughing inside it leave almost nothing. So when you imagine prehistoric humans doing nothing all day because they had no jobs, you may be imagining an empty day that never existed. Their day was full. It was just full of different things. And one of those things may have surprised you. Rest. Hunter-gatherers did not spend every waking hour searching for food. That assumption has been challenged by anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer communities. In the 1960s and 1970s, researchers studying groups such as the Kung San in southern Africa began documenting how much time people actually spent obtaining food. The results complicated the old image of humans constantly struggling for survival. Food acquisition could require significant effort, but it was not necessarily an 8-hour shift. Sometimes the hardest part was knowing where to look. A person who knew the landscape could find resources faster than someone who didn't. A hunter who understood animal behavior did not need to chase everything. A gatherer who remembered seasonal plants already knew where to walk. Knowledge reduced wasted effort. And that changes the meaning of time. Your ancestors did not necessarily have less work. They had less separation between work and life. There was no clear line between I am working now and I am living now. Preparing food was survival. Teaching a child was survival. Repairing a shelter was survival. Talking to another person could be survival. Resting could also be survival. And sometimes simply sitting still was useful. Because you could not hunt forever. You could not walk forever. You could not process food forever. The human body needs recovery. The group needed social connection. And the environment constantly forced people to wait. Wait for an animal. Wait for daylight. Wait for weather. Wait for food to cook. Wait for a wound to heal. Wait for the right season. That waiting was not necessarily wasted time. It was part of the system. But there was another activity that occupied prehistoric humans far more than modern schedules suggest. Maintenance. Your ancestors owned fewer objects than you do, but almost everything they owned mattered. A damaged stone tool could mean more work later. A broken spear could mean a failed hunt. Wet clothing could become dangerous in cold weather. A weak shelter could become a serious problem during a storm. So tools had to be repaired. Clothing had to be maintained. Fire had to be fed. Shelters had to be strengthened. Food had to be processed before it spoiled. Nothing came with a replacement guarantee. If your knife broke, you made another one. If your clothing tore, you repaired it. If your fire went out during a freezing night, you had a much bigger problem. And this is where prehistoric life starts to look less like unemployment and more like a job that never had a name, because every ordinary object around you demanded attention. But that still leaves the biggest question. If survival did not require 8 hours of nonstop labor, what did humans actually do with the time left over? There is a reason this matters. Modern life divides your time into categories: work, home, leisure, sleep. Your ancestors probably didn't. The same fire could be used for cooking, warmth, tool-making, conversation, and teaching. The same walk could be hunting, exploring, collecting food, and socializing. The same person could spend an hour doing something that looks like work, and then spend the next hour talking while continuing the same task. There was no clock telling you when one part of your life ended. And there was another enormous difference. You didn't have to produce something every minute. Research on contemporary hunter-gatherer societies has repeatedly shown that daily subsistence activities can occupy only part of the day, although the exact amount varies greatly by environment, season, and group. Anthropologist Marshall Solins famously described hunter-gatherers as the original affluent society in his 1968 essay. His argument was controversial, but the basic observation was important. A society can have relatively simple material needs without requiring every waking hour to be spent producing goods. If you only need enough food for the group, you don't necessarily need to produce thousands of extra units. There is no warehouse to fill, no shareholder waiting for growth, no monthly sales target, no factory running around the clock. Once immediate needs were handled, time could move somewhere else, and that somewhere else was often other people. Imagine sitting beside a fire 15,000 years ago. There is nothing on your screen, no television, no headphones, no notifications. The people around you are the entertainment. They are also your teachers, your memory, your history, your warning system, and your emotional support. A story about a dangerous animal could teach a child where not to go. A story about a distant valley could preserve information about water. A story about an ancestor could preserve social relationships. Language itself became a survival technology. You didn't need a written manual if someone could tell you what to remember. This is one reason prehistoric evenings may have been surprisingly social. After dark, productive activities became harder. Hunting became dangerous. Travel became difficult. Gathering plants was impossible. But fire created a small island of usable space. At sites such as Gesher, Benot, Yaakov in Israel, evidence of controlled fire dates back roughly 790,000 years. Long before Homo sapiens, humans were already using fire repeatedly. That changed the structure of the day. Fire extended usable time beyond sunset. It allowed cooking, It provided warmth. It offered protection. And it created a place where people could gather. The fire was not just technology. It was infrastructure, a shared center of human life. But there was another thing your ancestors had to spend time doing: watching. Not everything important required movement. Sometimes you needed to sit and observe. A hunter could watch an animal trail. A gatherer could watch the weather. A parent could watch a child. Someone could monitor the fire. Someone could listen for predators outside the shelter. In a world without clocks, phones, or cameras, attention itself became a resource. And your environment constantly demanded it. A change in wind could matter. A sudden silence among birds could matter. Fresh tracks could matter. Smoke moving in a different direction could matter. The ability to notice small changes could prevent major problems. This is also why prehistoric people likely spent enormous amounts of time teaching children. A child could not simply be handed a manual. They had to learn through observation. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy has argued that human childhood evolved within systems of cooperative care, where infants and children could be supported by multiple members of the social group. That meant childcare was not necessarily the responsibility of one exhausted parent working alone. Grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, other group members, different people could contribute. And this changed the economics of childhood. A child was not simply consuming resources. They were becoming a future source of knowledge and labor. But childhood itself took years. A young human could spend more than a decade learning how to navigate the environment, how to make tools, how to recognize plants, how to hunt, how to communicate, how to cooperate. That learning required time, and prehistoric societies had a reason to invest it, because information could be more valuable than any single object. A sharp stone could eventually break. A shelter could collapse. Food could disappear. But knowledge could travel with you. If you knew where water was, you could survive somewhere new. If you knew how to make fire, you could survive without carrying a permanent shelter. If you knew how to track animals, you could find food across unfamiliar terrain. Your brain became part of your equipment. And that brings you back to the original question. What did ancient humans do all day? They didn't simply hunt. They didn't simply gather. And they certainly didn't sit around waiting for civilization to invent jobs. They maintained. They watched. They learned. They taught. They traveled. They repaired. They prepared. They cared for children. They cared for injured people. They processed food. They made tools. They told stories. They rested. And sometimes they waited for the environment to change. But there is something even stranger about this. A huge portion of human history happened without the concept of a career. No one asked what you wanted to be when you grew up. You became useful through experience. Your identity could come from what you knew, who you cared for, where you lived, what you could make, what you could remember, and what you could teach. That means the modern question, what do you do, would have sounded very different 20,000 years ago. Because the answer probably wasn't a profession. It was a description of your place inside the group. And there was still one part of the prehistoric day we haven't counted. The hours when absolutely nothing urgent needed to happen. That is where the story gets stranger. There were moments when nothing urgent needed to happen. No animal to track. No shelter to repair. No food to process. No child demanding attention. No immediate danger. And those moments were not necessarily empty. They were part of being human. You could sit beside the fire. You could talk. You could watch someone work. You could play. You could make a simple object just because you wanted to. You could explore the area around camp. Or you could simply rest. Archaeology rarely preserves these moments. A stone tool survives. A bone survives. Charcoal survives. A conversation does not. A joke does not. A game does not. A quiet afternoon beside a river does not. This creates a strange bias. When you look at prehistoric archaeology, you mostly see the things that survive thousands of years. You see tools, weapons, hearths, animal bones, burials, structures. But these objects represent only a fraction of what happened during an ordinary day. The majority of human behavior disappeared, and that includes boredom. You probably assume boredom is a modern problem. You have nothing to do, so you reach for your phone. But your ancestors had no phones. That does not mean they had no boredom. Human brains existed long before social media, long before television, long before books, long before electric lights. If you have the capacity to become bored today, there is no reason to assume that capacity suddenly appeared in the last few centuries. The difference was what you did about it. You could talk. You could explore. You could make something. You could watch animals. You could practice a skill. You could play with children. You could tell stories. You could simply sit. And sometimes, doing nothing may have been completely rational. Your body needs recovery. Your attention needs recovery. Your muscles need recovery. Your brain needs periods when it is not solving immediate problems. That matters because prehistoric life was physically demanding. Walking across uneven terrain, carrying water, processing food, collecting wood, making tools, hunting, building shelters. All of these activities cost energy. Energy was not unlimited. Every unnecessary movement had a potential cost. So rest wasn't the opposite of survival. It was part of survival. And this creates a very different picture of prehistoric time. Your ancestors' day was probably not divided into 8 hours of work followed by 8 hours of leisure. It was a continuous cycle. Effort, recovery, observation, socializing, effort again, then sleep. The balance changed with the season. During a period of abundant food, there might be less pressure to search. During famine, almost every available hour could matter. During migration, travel could dominate the day. During winter, staying near shelter and conserving energy could become more important. There was no universal prehistoric schedule. There were thousands of different schedules. A coastal hunter might spend hours fishing. A forest group might spend the day gathering plants and nuts. A group following migrating herds could walk many kilometers. And people living in harsh environments might spend enormous amounts of time simply maintaining warmth. The environment wrote the schedule, not a clock, not a manager, not a calendar notification. The sun rose. The group moved. The weather changed. The food became available. The day ended. And then the pattern repeated. But something about this ancient lifestyle has survived. Your brain still expects periods of activity and periods of recovery. Your body still responds to daylight. Your hunger still follows biological rhythms. Your attention still fades after prolonged effort. You may spend your modern day sitting in front of a screen for 8 or 10 hours. But your nervous system was not designed around the modern workday. The human body existed for hundreds of thousands of years before offices. And for most of that time, your ancestors were not trying to maximize productivity. They were trying to manage energy. That distinction changes how you understand their lives. They didn't wake up asking how to become more productive. They asked what needed to be done. If food was available, they gathered it. If an animal could be hunted, they pursued it. If the shelter needed repair, they repaired it. If a child needed care, someone cared for them. If nothing urgent needed attention, they waited. And that may be the biggest difference between their world and yours. Your day can be filled even when nothing is actually happening. Notifications, messages, news, videos, emails, appointments, deadlines. Modern technology can fill every empty space. Your ancestors had empty spaces because the environment created them. A river had to be crossed tomorrow. A herd might not appear until next week. A plant might not ripen for another month. The next storm might not arrive until evening. You couldn't speed those things up. You had to wait. And waiting required something modern life rarely rewards: patience. But prehistoric humans did not spend their entire lives in peaceful leisure. Some days were brutally difficult. A failed hunt could mean hunger. A broken bone could destroy mobility. A winter storm could trap a group. An injury could change someone's role permanently. A drought could force migration. A predator could turn an ordinary walk into a life-or-death situation. That is why the image of prehistoric humans as carefree people with unlimited free time is just as misleading as the image of them working nonstop. Their lives were variable. Some days were exhausting. Some were dangerous. Some were productive. Some were social. And some were probably incredibly boring. That uncertainty was normal. Your ancestors did not have a stable weekly schedule. They had an environment that constantly changed the answer. So what did ancient humans do all day before jobs existed? They did almost everything that kept human life functioning. They found food. They found water. They maintained fire. They made tools. They repaired clothing. They built shelters. They cared for children. They cared for the injured. They taught knowledge. They watched animals. They traveled. They prepared for future problems. They socialized. They rested. And, sometimes, they did nothing. Not because they were lazy. Not because they had failed to invent work. But because human life existed long before the idea that every hour needed to produce something. For more than 95% of human existence, there were no offices waiting for you. No career ladder. No retirement plan. No Monday morning. There was only the next task, the next meal, the next season, the next journey, and the people sitting beside you. So when you look at your own day and wonder where the hours went, remember what most of human history looked like. Your ancestors didn't have jobs. They had lives. And the strange part is that you still carry the same ancient brain into a world that expects you to fill every minute.